case against James Comey, the former FBI director, just now making some key filings in the federal indictment against him, trying to get the case thrown out. So let's get off the sidelines and go into the arena. My panel is here, but first, let's get right to CNN crime and justice correspondent Caitlin Polans with those filings. I know you're looking through them. Caitlin, we know James Comey was going to argue a few things to try and get a judge to dismiss this case. Take us through what you're seeing.
Well, Pam, the big one here is that Comey's team is using Donald Trump's words, or attempting to use his own words, against him, trying to get this case dismissed by saying, look at what Trump has ordered the Justice Department to do. So I'm talking about a filing. It's called a selective or vindictive prosecution filing, meaning that Comey's team is arguing to a federal judge that Comey should not have been charged with a crime here, and the reasons that he were charged were not good ones. In this argument, they say that Comey had been a critic of Trump. Trump had a years-long personal animus.
Okay, so here's something wild that just happened. And yeah, I'm talking about something that could actually change how we think about presidential power in this country, like forever. So Donald Trump has been obsessed with James Comey for years now, right? We all know this. The guy fired him back in 2017, wrote tweets about him, called him every name in the book, and now we're watching Trump's ultimate revenge fantasy completely fall apart in federal court. And honestly, the way this is going down is absolutely insane. Here's what happened. A federal judge just basically told the Justice Department that their criminal case against Comey, the case that Trump has been pushing for since literally day one of his second term. Yeah, that case looks like garbage. Like, the judge is looking at this prosecution and going, wait a minute, this looks like a presidential grudge match, dressed up as justice, and he's not wrong. Come on, we all saw this coming, right? Trump gets back into office, and suddenly, the former FBI director who investigated him, who wrote that book about him, who's been criticizing him for years, suddenly that guy gets indicted? Yeah, totally normal. Nothing suspicious about that timing at all. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And then legal analyst Elliot Williams, chief Washington correspondent for Puck News, Leanne Caldwell, former communications director for the DNC, Mo Lathey, and Republican strategist Doug Heye, and former Trump attorney Bill Brennan. Also want to note, on the left side of your screen, you'll see our Arena text chain. That's where we're sharing additional analysis.
Difficult to win a dismissal on the basis of vindictive or selective prosecution, because a defendant has to get inside the heads of prosecutors and establish that they were thinking something bad when they brought the case, that they brought the case on some improper basis, or on, that he was exercising his free speech rights and was prosecuted for that. So they're really hard to win.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Comey's lawyers just filed new motions, like just days ago, adding even more reasons why this whole thing should get thrown out. And the judge, Judge Michael Nachmanoff, he's actually listening. He's asking questions, hard questions, the kind of questions that make prosecutors sweat. And Trump is losing his mind about it. Like, we're talking full meltdown mode here. He's reposting stuff on social media, calling Comey a corrupt piece of garbage. He's calling him a disgraced liar and leaker. He's doing everything except actually addressing the substance of what's happening in that courtroom. Because, and this is the key part, he literally cannot defend what his Justice Department did here without admitting it was personal. This is wild, okay? Because what we're watching is basically a test case for whether a president can use the criminal justice system to go after his enemies. That's not hyperbole. That's literally what's on trial here. Not just Comey, but the whole idea of whether the Justice Department works for the American people or works for whoever's sitting in the Oval Office. And the facts that are coming out, they're damning, like really damning. We're finding out that Trump literally forced out a U.S. attorney who refused to bring charges against Comey, just got rid of him, replaced him with someone who would do what Trump wanted. That's not how justice is supposed to work. That's how revenge works. So Comey's legal team is arguing something pretty simple. They're saying, look, presidential hatred is not a legitimate ground for prosecuting someone. Like, you can't just indict people because the president doesn't like them. That's Banana Republic stuff. That's not America. But here's the thing that should worry everyone watching this, and I mean everyone, regardless of where you stand politically. If Trump can do this to Comey, if he can weaponize the Justice Department against someone who investigated him, who criticized him, who embarrassed him, then what's stopping the next president from doing the same thing? What's stopping any president from turning the DOJ into their personal attack dog? This isn't about whether you like Comey or hate him. Honestly, that doesn't matter. This is about whether we're going to let presidents prosecute their critics, because once that door opens, it doesn't close. Every future president will look at this and think, well, Trump did it, so why can't I? And the timing here, okay? The timing makes this even worse. We're watching this play out while Trump is dealing with his own legal issues, while the country is still divided over the 2020 election, over January 6th, over everything. This is gasoline on a fire that's already burning out of control. The judge is looking at all of this, and you can tell he's uncomfortable. The motions from Comey's team are pointing out irregularities in the grand jury process. They're showing political motives behind every step of this prosecution. They're basically laying out a roadmap that shows this whole thing was rigged from the start. And Trump's response? Attack the messenger, attack Comey, attack the judge if he rules the wrong way. It's the same playbook we've seen a million times. But this time it might not work. Because this time there's a federal judge who seems to actually care about whether justice is being served or whether it's being weaponized. So buckle up, because what happens next could literally reshape how presidential power works in this country. We're talking about precedents that will last for generations. We're talking about whether the guardrails on presidential power actually mean anything anymore. And we're talking about whether a personal vendetta can become official government policy. This story has everything: political drama, legal fireworks, a president melting down on social media, a former FBI director fighting for his freedom, and at the center of it all, a question that should terrify everyone. Can the president prosecute anyone he wants just because he doesn't like them? Let's dive in. All right, so let's get into the actual details here, because honestly, this story is even crazier when you know what's really going on behind the scenes. First off, we need to understand the charges themselves. The Justice Department indicted James Comey for allegedly lying to Congress. Specifically, they say he lied during testimony about the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. And yeah, that's already a politically charged topic, right? Like, we're talking about the investigation that Trump has called a witch hunt approximately 7,000 times. But here's where it gets wild. The questions that Comey supposedly lied about, they came from Ted Cruz. Yeah, that Ted Cruz. And according to Comey's legal team, those questions were so long and confusing that nobody could have answered them perfectly. Like, we're talking multi-part questions with hypotheticals stacked on top of other hypotheticals, the kind of questions that are designed to trip someone up. So Comey's lawyers are basically saying, look, you can't indict someone for giving imperfect answers to deliberately confusing questions, especially when those questions are coming from a senator who's politically aligned with the president who wants this prosecution to happen. Like, come on, the whole thing smells bad, and the judge seems to agree. Judge Nachmanoff is looking at this and asking the prosecution to explain why these charges make sense, and apparently they're having trouble doing that, which, yeah, that's not a good sign for the government's case. But let's zoom out for a second, because the bigger story here is how this prosecution even happened in the first place, and this is where it gets really sketchy. So, according to multiple reports, and we're talking New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all the major outlets have confirmed this. The original U.S. attorney who was reviewing the Comey case said no, said there wasn't enough evidence, said it wouldn't be appropriate to bring charges. And you know what Trump did? He forced that attorney out, just removed him from the position, and then he appointed someone new, someone who, surprise, surprise, decided that actually, yeah, we should totally indict Comey. Like, are you kidding me? That's not how the justice system is supposed to work. The whole point of having independent prosecutors is so that the president can't just shop around until he finds someone who will do what he wants. But that's exactly what happened here. And Comey's lawyers are hammering this point in their motions. They're arguing that the entire prosecution is tainted because it only exists because Trump wanted it to exist. They're using phrases like presidential hatred, an instrument of Trump's hatred, strong language. Yeah, but is it wrong? Let's look at the timeline. Trump and Comey have been enemies since 2017. That's when Trump fired him as FBI director. That's when Comey started writing memos about his interactions with Trump. That's when he testified before Congress. That's when he wrote his book, basically calling Trump unfit for office. And Trump never forgot, never forgave. He's been tweeting about Comey, posting about him, bringing him up in interviews for years, calling him names, saying he should be investigated, saying he should be in jail. This isn't speculation. This is all public record. So when Trump wins a second term and suddenly Comey gets indicted, yeah, that's suspicious. When Trump has to replace a prosecutor to make it happen, that's more than suspicious. That's a smoking gun. Now, the prosecution will argue, and they have been arguing, that the timing is just coincidence, that the evidence speaks for itself, that this isn't about Trump's personal feelings. But here's the problem with that argument. The evidence apparently isn't that strong, because if it was, the first prosecutor would have brought charges. If it was, the judge wouldn't be expressing serious doubts. If it was, Comey's defense team wouldn't be filing motion after motion, pointing out problems with the case. And let's talk about what this means for the Justice Department itself, because career prosecutors are watching this. They're seeing what happens when political appointees override professional judgment. They're seeing what happens when the president's personal grievances become the basis for criminal cases. This creates a chilling effect. It tells prosecutors that if you don't do what the president wants, you might lose your job. It tells them that professional independence is less important than political loyalty. And that's dangerous, really dangerous. Because here's the thing, the Justice Department is supposed to be independent for a reason. It's supposed to make decisions based on evidence and law, not based on who the president likes or doesn't like. Once you lose that independence, once it becomes just another tool in the president's political arsenal, you don't get it back easily. And this isn't just about Trump, okay? Like, yeah, Trump is the one doing this now. But imagine if this becomes the new normal. Imagine if every president from now on thinks, well, Trump went after Comey, so I can go after my critics too. Where does it end? Think about it. If Trump can prosecute Comey for allegedly lying to Congress, and let's be real, half of Congress probably lies every time they open their mouths, then what stops him from prosecuting journalists who write critical stories? What stops him from prosecuting former officials who speak out against him? What stops him from prosecuting anyone who gets in his way? The answer is supposed to be institutional norms. It's supposed to be the independence of the Justice Department. It's supposed to be judges who will call out politically motivated prosecutions when they see them. And right now, we're testing whether those safeguards actually work. Judge Nachmanoff is basically the last line of defense here. If he dismisses the charges, he's sending a message that presidential grudges aren't enough. If he lets the case proceed, well, then we're in new territory, dangerous territory. And Trump knows this. That's why he's so angry about the judge's skepticism. That's why he's lashing out on social media. Because if this case falls apart, it's not just a loss in court. It's a statement that there are still limits on presidential power, that you can't just prosecute your enemies because you feel like it. But here's what really gets me. Trump's defenders are out there saying that Comey deserves this, that he did wrong, that he leaked classified information, that he lied to Congress. Fine. If that's true, then prove it in court. But prove it based on evidence, not based on the president's Twitter feed. Prove it based on law, not based on political revenge. The problem is that when you look at how this case came together, when you look at the prosecutor getting replaced, when you look at the timing, when you look at Trump's public statements, it's really hard to see this as anything other than revenge. It's really hard to see this as normal prosecutorial discretion. And that's what Comey's lawyers are arguing. They're saying that even if Comey technically did something wrong, even if there's some technical violation somewhere, this prosecution is illegitimate because it's motivated by hatred, by presidential animosity, by politics. And honestly, they might be right, because the alternative is accepting that presidents can use the justice system against their enemies. And once we accept that, once we say that's okay, we've crossed the line we can't uncross. Now let's talk about the specific legal arguments Comey's team is making, because they're not just saying this is political. They're pointing to actual problems with how the case was built, problems with the grand jury process, problems with witness testimony, problems with how evidence was presented. They're arguing that the prosecution cherry-picked which parts of Comey's testimony to focus on, that they ignored context, that they took ambiguous statements and twisted them into lies. And when you read the motions, when you see the actual questions Cruz asked and the answers Comey gave, yeah, it starts to look really questionable. The prosecution is trying to argue that Comey knowingly made false statements, but knowingly is the key word there. You have to prove intent. You have to prove that he knew what he was saying was false and said it anyway, and that's really hard to prove when the questions themselves are confusing and when Comey's answers are nuanced. This is why the judge is skeptical. This is why he's asking the prosecution to justify the charges, because on paper, without the political context, this case looks weak. Add in the political context and it looks worse. Okay, so let's break down exactly why this matters and where this is probably heading, because this isn't just legal drama. This is about the future of how power works in America. First, the immediate impact. If Judge Nachmanoff dismisses these charges, and it's looking like that might happen, Trump is going to absolutely lose it. We're talking full-scale meltdown. He's already calling Comey names. He's already attacking the case. Imagine what happens when a judge tells him his revenge prosecution was illegitimate. But beyond Trump's reaction, a dismissal would set a precedent. It would say that courts will scrutinize politically motivated prosecutions. It would say that presidential animus is not a valid basis for criminal charges, and that's huge. That's a guardrail that we desperately need right now. On the other hand, if the case proceeds, if the judge lets it go to trial, then we're basically saying that as long as you can find some technical violation, any violation, you can prosecute your political enemies, and that opens the floodgates. Every president from now on will have their enemies list. Every administration will have their target for prosecution. Second, let's talk about what this reveals about Trump's Justice Department, because this isn't the only controversial case they're pursuing. There are investigations into other former officials who crossed Trump. There are rumors about other potential prosecutions. This Comey case is just the most high-profile example. What we're seeing is a pattern. Trump views the Justice Department as his law firm. He views prosecutors as his personal attorneys, and he's not shy about it. He literally fired a U.S. attorney to get this prosecution. He's publicly called for investigations into his enemies. He treats the DOJ like it works for him personally, not for the American people. And his supporters will say, well, Obama did this, or Clinton did this, or every president politicizes the Justice Department to some extent. And yeah, there's truth to that. But there's a difference between political appointees having some influence and the president personally ordering specific prosecutions of specific enemies. There's a difference between political considerations and personal vendettas. Trump has crossed that line. This Comey case proves it. The fact that he had to replace a prosecutor to make it happen proves it. The timing proves it. His own public statements prove it. Third, we need to talk about the implications for democracy. And I know that sounds dramatic, but hear me out. One of the foundations of democracy is that political opponents don't prosecute each other just for being opponents. You can investigate actual crimes. Yeah, but you can't use the criminal justice system as a political weapon, because once you do that, elections become existential. If losing power means you might go to jail, not for actual crimes, but for political reasons, then nobody will ever concede defeat. Nobody will ever accept election results. Every transfer of power becomes a potential crisis, and we're already seeing that. Trump refused to accept the 2020 election results. January 6th happened. Now he's back in power and going after his enemies. What do you think happens in 2028? You think whoever wins is going to peacefully transfer power? Or are they going to worry that the other side will prosecute them? This is how democracies die. Not all at once. Gradually. Step by step. Each norm that gets broken makes it easier to break the next one. Each line that gets crossed moves the line further. The Comey prosecution is one of those steps. It's one of those lines. And what happens in Judge Nachmanoff's courtroom is going to tell us whether we're willing to stop this slide or whether we're just going to keep going. Fourth, let's talk about Comey himself. And look, I get it. Not everyone likes the guy. He made controversial decisions about the Clinton email investigation. He wrote that book. He's been a constant Trump critic. Some people think he's a grandstander. But here's the thing. You don't have to like James Comey to recognize that prosecuting him for political reasons is wrong. You don't have to agree with everything he's done to see that this case is problematic. This isn't about defending Comey. This is about defending the principle that prosecutors should make decisions based on evidence, not based on who the president hates. And Comey, to his credit, is fighting back. His legal team is filing aggressive motions. They're not backing down. They're basically daring the prosecution to prove this isn't political. And so far, the prosecution seems to be struggling with that. Fifth, think about the message this sends to future whistleblowers and critics. If you speak out against the president, if you investigate them, if you testify about what you know, you might get prosecuted later. Not for what you did wrong, but for daring to cross them. That's terrifying. That means nobody will ever stand up to presidential misconduct. Nobody will ever tell the truth if it makes the president look bad, because the risk is too high, the consequences are too severe. We need people in government who are willing to speak truth to power. We need investigators who will follow evidence wherever it leads. We need officials who will put country over party. But if those people know they'll be targeted later, if they know the president will come after them with criminal charges, why would they ever stick their necks out? This case is about more than James Comey. It's about whether anyone in government will ever feel safe opposing a president again. Now, what happens next? Well, Judge Nachmanoff could dismiss the case outright. He could dismiss some charges but not others. He could let everything proceed to trial. We don't know yet, but we do know that this judge is skeptical. We know he's asking tough questions. We know that Comey's defense is hitting hard on the political motivation angle. And we know that Trump is worried, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't be melting down on social media. If the case gets dismissed, expect Trump to attack the judge. expect him to claim the justice system is rigged against him, which is ironic since he controls the Justice Department, but whatever. Expect him to call for investigations into the judge. Expect him to rage about deep state conspiracies. It's going to get ugly. If the case proceeds, expect Comey to become even more vocal. Expect more revelations about how this prosecution came together. Expect this to drag out for months or years, and expect it to become a major political issue heading into the next election cycle. Because here's what this case really represents. It's a test of whether our institutions can resist presidential abuse of power, a test of whether judges will stand up to politically motivated prosecutions, a test of whether we still have a functioning system of checks and balances. And right now, we're in the middle of that test. We don't know if we're going to pass or fail, but what we do know is that this matters. It matters whether presidents can prosecute their enemies. It matters whether the Justice Department is independent or political. It matters whether courts will protect people from vengeful prosecutions. And yeah, it also matters whether we as citizens care about this stuff, because if we don't pay attention, if we just dismiss this as more political drama, if we don't hold leaders accountable for abusing power, then it's going to keep happening. It's going to get worse. So watch this case. Pay attention to what Judge Nachmanoff decides. Pay attention to how the prosecution responds to these motions. Pay attention to whether they can actually prove that this isn't just Trump settling scores. Because what happens here is going to echo for years, maybe decades. We're setting precedents right now, good ones or bad ones. We're deciding what kind of country we want to be. We're deciding whether presidential power has limits or whether it's unlimited. And honestly, we better choose carefully, because once you let presidents prosecute their enemies, once you accept that as normal, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. You can't unring that bell. This is the line. This is where we decide. And Trump's Comey revenge plot, which just blew up in spectacular fashion in federal court, might be the thing that finally forces us to make that choice. The judge has the power to stop this, to say no, to remind everyone that in America, you can't just prosecute people because you don't like them, but he also has the power to let it continue, to normalize this behavior, to make it easier for every future president to do the same thing. And we're about to find out which path he chooses. We're about to find out if the system still works, if the guardrails still hold, if justice still means something beyond whoever has the most power. So yeah, stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and what comes next might just change everything. This could be the moment that defines how presidential power works for the next generation. Or it could be the moment we look back on and wonder why we didn't do more to stop what was coming. Either way, we're living through history right now, and the Comey case is at the center of it all.